All right, so we are here tonight for a panel of elected social workers, and this is a class, Social Work 649 at the University of Michigan School of Social Work. I'm Carrie Rheingans, the instructor for this course. This class is policy practice with current events. And so this semester, it's only 5 sessions. Each week we learn about a particular part of policy advocacy, and then the students make a final presentation where they share some recommendations about a policy that and give some socially just examples or recommendations. So this is the last day of class, and the students wanted to hear from real elected policymaking social workers. We will be going through, talking about a few questions and asking some questions from the students, and then we'll share this with the other sections as well. So thank you all for being here tonight. I'm going to go around and just ask you to introduce yourself and what is your current elected role, your jurisdiction, and yeah, I think that's just the basic intro that I would like. So Trustee DuPree, let's start with you.
First on the frying pan, I see. Okay. So my name is Krystle DuPree. I am an alum of U of M and EMU, so that's cool. I am a mom, a single mom, 17-year-old son, and I briefly served in the military as a mortuary affairs specialist. Right now, I am on the Ann Arbor School Board. So, that is what I do in my this is a second job because I'm also an addictions counselor. So.
Thank you. Councilmember Song.
Hi, I'm Linh Song. I'm on the Ann Arbor City Council. I represent Ward 2, so that's the northeast corner of Ann Arbor. I was elected in 2020. Before that, I served on the library board. I'm a graduate of the MSW program, and God, I've been here for a very long time. I have an 11-year-old and a 16-year-old. I might have a puppy kind of jump in the middle of this, so don't be alarmed. He's only 13 weeks old, so but the chaos he brings is not near. It's different from political chaos, so hopefully it's tolerable to everyone.
Puppies and kids are part of pandemic life. Councilmember Santiago-Romero.
Thank you. As well as COVID. So sorry, folks, for tuning in a little bit late. I'm actually home with COVID. I got tested positive yesterday, and here we are. My name is Gabby Santiago-Romero. I'm a council member for Detroit City Council, District 6, newly elected. Also went to U of M School of Social Work, and prior to this, spent my time organizing with We the People, and I've worked for a number of different nonprofits. Professor Carrie was actually my professor when I was at U of M, and her course was one of my favorite courses, so this feels very full circle for me.
I love it too. Thank you for being able to join us despite the modern plague. So you're all social workers. You've all been elected. So I wanted to ask a few questions about campaigning and then a few questions about serving in your role. So thinking about the decision-making process and considerations when you're thinking about running for elected office, what are some of the things you were thinking about or considering or worried about? And we can go in any order, whoever wants to jump in.
So you're asking why we ran for office?
Well, what were some of the things you were thinking about or considering, weighing, if I do it, then I can't do this, or this is what'll be on my family? Like, what kinds of things were you thinking about that? And if you would like to share why you wanted to run for office, that's great too.
For me, I was just figuring, the big factor was figuring out how I could juggle childcare if my children were old enough. One was, they were already in elementary school. I brought them both campaigning with me. It was a mutual love for the library. So they understood what I was trying to do was represent the library. They also knew I was disappointed by a library bond that had failed. So a current city council member was behind this campaign called Save the Library. It was actually pretty disingenuous. So there is a ballot initiative to raise additional monies to rebuild the downtown library. It's an old building. It gets sewage floods the first floor pretty regularly. But some Ann Arborites didn't want the tax increase to rebuild that building. So they launched a campaign called Save the Library, but it was actually Save the Library as it is while it's failing without additional tax dollars, right? So folks rallied, they're like, that sounds like a good idea. I'll vote for Save the Library, not knowing that what they were voting for was actually, not approving an essential bond to rebuild that. So my kids followed my disappointment because I said, who doesn't love a library? Who would vote against rebuilding a library, right? And it turns out they were my neighbors. So it was kind of a wake-up call to understand how there are different perspectives and priorities in Ann Arbor. And I thought that if I ran, then maybe I could have a better conversation and convince folks that the library is worth investing in, because I'm a firstborn American in my family. My parents were refugees from Vietnam and Laos. And because, I relied on libraries to learn how to speak English, read American literature and history and translate that and share that with my family. So the library has been really essential to how, to our success and integration in this country. So I was going to fight for the library. So it was childcare, and then remaining anger and frustration from that bond failure. So that's pretty much how I came to politics and why I came to politics.
Thank you. You want to go next, Chris? Okay.
So as far as thinking about running for office, I really think the idea kind of came when I was at EMU. It started there. I actually volunteered for the Washington County Democratic Party and the WCDP Black Caucus while I was at EMU. And the whole idea was, how do you add a micro perspective to macro social work? And, kind of touch that middle ground, which is meso social work, which we always kind of forget about, that little bridge between the two. And I had a lot of teachers that were very supportive of this because they worked in jobs that delivered direct service. So in learning from them, I was able to learn how funding and policies and legislations affect individual people and how it affects folks being able to get services. One of the things I was able to learn is, what does evidence-based practice actually mean when you're talking about working with groups and whole communities rather than just an individual? So after some thinking and folks, a couple people reached out to me, the idea was, well, where do you apply this perspective and where do you be of best service? To me, school board was the biggest thing. I had no idea the school board was going to turn out to be ground zero for the pandemic. Did not know that, but it did turn out to be that way because the most important people in your lives are your kids, and you're making decisions that affects people's children and their education. It affects all of our futures because these are our future leaders. So, I'm very, I feel like it's very valuable to be there. But, one of the things that I had to weigh in was also childcare. I'm a single parent, right? A lot of the people who were providing me support were people who were extremely vulnerable to COVID. So like my grandmother, my elder aunts, friends who have elderly folks in their homes. How do I manage now that I have limited resources and support, because we all have to think about the health and well-being of others. So kind of managing it, I'm kind of fortunate to have a kid that's real patient. So when I had to, get on the phone or do like these constant Zoom things, he was able to occupy himself and kind of give me that space. But the biggest thing was, how is this going to affect my family, our little family, me and my son. So.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Gabby.
Yeah, so for me, my decision-making process in making the choice to run for office was years in the making. I'm an immigrant. I come from poverty. I still live in the same house that I grew up in since I was 6 years old in Southwest Detroit. Grew up single mother. I'm queer. I'm a short brown woman. And so all of these things were things that I had in the forefront when making this choice. And really one of my biggest considerations was if I'm going to win or if I'm going to lose, if I'm going to run, if I'm running, who's going to pay my bills? Because when you run for office at a local space like this, you can't run to fund yourself. I believe the federal level can, whatever they can fundraise a portion of that they can use to sustain themselves. And quite frankly, people don't run for office because it's so expensive, it's so time consuming. And if you don't have the resources, you're really out of luck. So I had to make all those decisions. And not only that, as a woman of color, that is who I am, as I described all of my identities, you also become very scared of whether or not people will take you seriously. If they even want you in these positions of leadership. But I also took into consideration the fact that Rashida Tlaib is my congresswoman. She was my state rep, that my councilwoman was the first Latina to be elected to city council in Detroit, that we have Stephanie Ching, the first Asian American to run elected office in the state legislature, who all run, who all won, and who all ran on the same values that I ran on. So I decided prior to running, I ran first for county commissioner against a 20-year incumbent in 2020. So actually the day that we got our first case of COVID was the same week that I was going to knock on doors. So I lost that race, quite frankly, because it takes a lot of door knocking, communicating with people. I wasn't able to do so, but I had gone through every how to run for office training, felt very prepared. And for my next run, we did really well. So I took all those things into consideration. It's a hard choice to make, but I think with preparation and with good people, you might be in the right place to do so.
Thank you. So thinking about these considerations, I heard, identities are really important to think about, and what you might be representing and what experiences you have. Childcare is something to consider. So these are things to think about for our students to think about when they might want to think about running for office. And seeing currently elected women of color with kids, queer, you can do it. You're showing the students that they can do it too. So thank you. I'm also curious, what role did social work ethics or values or practices play in your campaigning portion of getting elected?
Should we just go in the same order again? I did policy evaluation. And after I did policy evaluation, I worked in anti-trafficking and international adoption. So I was part of a group that worked closely with the State Department, Immigration, and FBI, mostly investigating American adoption agencies going to developing countries and buying infants or trafficking children. So I came from kind of really difficult work that approached policymaking. There's evaluation, but it was like a strong human rights perspective. And then it was exhausting. I just couldn't do it. It just took a lot of me. So I looked at local work and trying to figure out how can local policymaking impact your immediate quality of life, and then seeing if there's human rights work, related work that was kind of similar, evaluation work, policy evaluation work, and it does happen at a local level. So my social work skills comes in from the training from the school social work, but also for me, there are only 2 BIPOC representatives on city council, and I'm really mindful of the voices who don't come to our meetings and advocate for themselves, who don't take up our inboxes, and it's BIPOC folks, vulnerable folks. And when it came to thinking about budgets, thinking about policing, thinking about the federal pandemic relief funding and how to prioritize that, it was my social work skills that came in hand, where I had to say, we can't expect our most vulnerable community members to come and say, yes, I want UBI, I want universal basic income, whereas most of us receive requests to fix the roads. My social work skills come in handy. We have another social worker on council too, Kathy Griswold, and we just have very, I think, different perspectives in how we approach our work and our communities. For me, it's who's missing at the table, and how do we invite them? How do we press City Hall to change community engagement processes and just be really critical and say, like, well, if every community engagement effort we have is mostly white, older, wealthy, retired and owns a home, we're missing a pretty good segment of our community. Krystle knows these stats. It's, I think 1 in 4 kids in Ann Arbor Public Schools lives at and below poverty level, right? So they're not coming to city council. But the social workers have to speak up for them in that capacity.
Thank you. So yes, so that was a lot of description of how your social work practice and ethics serve you today in your current elected role. Is there anything that you used or thought of that was related to your social work background in campaigning at all? Or not really?
The big thing was how do you deal with racists in campaigning? Going door to door and people. This was so 2016 was when I first ran for my first office, and that's library board, right? And I was pretty confident that we would have a different president that year, and it was a pretty non-controversial election, but I don't remember. It had been a while since there was a non-white library board member, and on city council, there's a South Asian woman who was on council a couple years before me. Ali Ramali is Palestinian, but it had been 15 years since we've had a Black council member. So having people of color run for local office is unusual. Actually, the school board is the most diverse in Ann Arbor, to its credit. But in campaigning, people would slam their doors. I would never vote for someone like you. I'm Republican. I would never vote for a Democrat. At one point, I campaigned with a friend who's South Asian, and I could hear folks say inside, "Don't open the doors to Hare Krishnas." So it was interesting. And I had my children with me often. So I had to explain to my kids why some people didn't want to talk to me. And I would just tell them, we'll just save this leaflet for the next house. We're just going to save our material, and hopefully someone else will listen to why I'm qualified. One, and then, hopefully they're open to talking to me. But yeah, that was kind of using your social work skills to understand where people are coming from, where there's a sense of xenophobia that was really kind of ramping up in 2016. And then especially 2020 with COVID, where folks were spitting on elderly Asian Americans in my neighborhood, telling them to go back to where they came from. The racism has been eye-opening.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm sorry that you had to endure that and are still enduring it even today, I know. Krystle, Gabby, do you want to add anything about social work ethics or values or practices in campaigning or current serving?
Sure, and I can be brief. So while campaigning, social work was the #1 thing that I started with. People in the city of Detroit, 30% of our residents live in poverty. Not just 1 out of 4 children. It's 30% of our residents live at or below the poverty line. So having someone as a social worker that cares about making sure that we are funding the resources that they need was something that was very engaging for folks. And I leave that in my office right now. So Joelle Rheingans, who's my resident and services manager, went to U of M with me. We both got our masters together. And I think of our work as part of it being not just service to the community, but customer service. We answer the phones, we answer the emails immediately. We get them what they need immediately. We connect them to resources immediately. And that's because that's what we need. And that's what good social workers do, is they connect you to those resources. They help you with education. We do a lot of political education around our budget process and our council process to engage activists and advocates to ask for what they need. So definitely during my campaign, I proudly said that I was a master social worker, that I got my master's from U of M. And people really liked that, and they believed that. And we're proving that, I think, in our work on council.
Thank you.
All right. Honestly, when I'm thinking of this question, I actually think of like specific, like the social work code of ethics, values, things that we're supposed to somehow memorize. I don't know how, but when I think about the dignity and worth of every individual, of every person, that was a lot of what happened with campaigning. So, you know, I ran in 2020 before we had really access to vaccines for everyone. Adjusting to COVID was interesting because we went from being able to knock on doors to people saying, seriously, don't come to my door, you can make somebody in my family sick. So you had to adjust and have door hangers instead of having folks knock. You know, we had to think, do I call people who have been disproportionately hit by the economic downturn of COVID and ask them for campaign funding? Or do I lean on people who have more disposable income and, you know, may not be hit as hard if I ask them for like 20, 30, 40, you know, $50, you know, and that's actually kind of on the low end when we talk about 20, 30, 40, $50. You know, we had to think about if we're going to have events, how big are the events going to be? All this thinking about the individuals who are going to be present, you know, and even with all those changes, we adapted. And I think that the key thing about social work is the concept of resilience, of being able to roll with the resistance and things like that. We adapted. So we had back-to-back Zoom stuff. Well, we did it, you know, gave you opportunity to do a lot of research and write up some things, you know, which you may be too nervous to actually say if you were in front of people. You know, so you had that opportunity. I had the opportunity to speak to some alumni from Ann Arbor Public Schools and, you know, really listen to their perspective on what can stand to be improved and what their experiences were when they were in the district. So, you know, that recognizing that listening to multiple perspectives is so important. Shout out to my campaign team. My campaign team consisted of folks who were recently graduated, still students, all these different perspectives that I simply did not possess, but they were able to share that with me. And they helped me so much. So, you know, the importance of relationships, of human relationships, that's another one of our values that comes in play when you're talking about campaigning. It's super important to be able to make these phone calls and talk to people and be able to make these connections. So really that was a lot of what went into campaigning for me, just really thinking about those specific values.
I think, thank you. Something I heard from you all about campaigning and serving is that you go to people to hear what they're struggling with, what they need, what they want. You don't wait for them to come to you. And I think that's something that sets social workers apart, is we know we can't just wait for somebody to come tell us. We need to go make sure we're hearing from people that don't get sought out a lot. And I've seen all three of you do that in your current role and, you know, previously while you were campaigning. So thank you for demonstrating that. So I think one thing we didn't talk about at the beginning, but I think, Krystle, you're a volunteer, right? You get paid nothing to do this job.
$130. I'm rolling in the money. Like $130. Yes, $130 a month. I think one of the trustees actually brought up the possibility of increasing our stipend at the last board meeting, but yep, I'm just in here.
I mean, that might cover gas these days.
You know, I might be able to throw somebody, you know, a few dollars for a couple of hours of childcare. Thank you for that. So,
Wow.
you know,
Wow.
but yeah, no, you value education, you do. So that's really it. I think that school should always be a safe place for kids. Like I said, we are molding our future leaders. So that's important enough to volunteer. So,
Yeah. Well, thank you for volunteering for that very tough position. And Lynn, you're technically part-time, right? It's not supposed to be a full-time job, but I'm sure it can be.
It depends on what's going on. I never have strong feelings. Yeah, where the pay is about $25K a year. It's not supposed to be a full-time job. I'm really lucky. I actually donate my salary to social service, different social service agencies every year. So, yeah, it's the work is what you make of it, right? So, it's not just the city council meetings. There's also commissions. So planning commission, environmental commission. I'm on arts commission. So there's the work at the table, and then there's the organizing and the writing the resolutions, and then all the committee meetings around there too. Krystle is the same. Krystle's on. It's not just the board meetings. You're on different committees.
yeah, we have a couple of committees. We have a governance committee. It's the governance committee is interesting because it kind of incorporates policy work for the board, but also advocacy work and reaching out to other elected bodies or elected officials. So that's one of the committees, and also the performance committee. So the performance committee is just that. We look at student performance and see how we can improve and where we are. So those are the two committees that I serve on. In addition to that, we have students who are trying to develop like a student school board. So elevating student voice is actually something that's being talked about nationwide. So the MSAB, which is the Michigan Association for School Boards, during their conference, they had a whole thing on elevating student voice.
Oh, wow.
And then the National Association for School Boards had several sessions on elevating student voice. So this is really important right now. And, I'm actually trying my best to work with these students to help them be able to develop this and hopefully get it approved by the board so we can have student voice at our school board.
That's pretty awesome. When I was in high school over 20 years ago, my high school actually my school board invited a junior and a senior to join the school board. And when I was a junior, I was appointed to the school board, and it was like back in the days of paper, right? This was the 90s. They gave me this binder with like rainbow tabs, and I was like, what is this? I did not know what I was getting myself into. And so, somebody taught me how to do the budget, and then they said, hey, we want to talk about these or those things to do in the school. Why don't you go ask some students what they think? So I got to get out of class in high school and go talk to like elementary school students and ask them what they wanted the school board to do. Of course, they had no idea, right? They're elementary school students, but they knew what they wanted on the playground, and so I could go back and tell the school board, and like they weren't talking to the students. I remember it being like totally flabbergasted at first, and then realizing what you could do if you talked to the people and tried to do what they wanted. And then, but they don't have it anymore. They don't have the junior and senior on the school board anymore. And I don't know why. That was 20 years ago. Well, it seems like
maybe if city council switched salaries with the school board.
I would be very happy.
Yeah, right. Oh gosh. And Gabby, you're full-time, right? And you have like a staff.
Yes. So I'm full-time. I have the staff. I also I have a salary. I think it's 80 something. Quite frankly, I think that's an issue. I work 12 hours a day at my worst. I'm also on a number of different boards outside of work. I do have a staff. I get a budget of about 600,000, which seems like a lot, but quite frankly, it's really not when you want to pay your staff a good living wage with benefits, and benefits are 30% of their salary. So if I want to pay someone 70K, which I do pay my staff 70 or 90, some of them get paid more than I do. And that's because I understand the need to have good staff that are getting paid well for their jobs. And quite frankly, people like me can't afford to do this for free. I have school debts. I have a life I want to live, and I can't live that on a salary and in this school debt that I have. So it's an issue. We need to pay legislators well. Quite frankly, what ends up happening are people, many who do not care, who have the means to run and who make decisions for our lives. And oftentimes it's why we get what we get. I see that very clearly in our state legislature, oftentimes, and not even that, our county commissioners, many of them are retired state legislators with businesses who can work part-time, who can work on a stipend or on a part-time salary. So I feel very fortunate to be able to make what I make. Don't get me wrong, but I get livid just knowing that CEOs work a few hours a day or whatever they want to work and still make six figures. Without making a direct impact in my community the way that I wish that they did. So it's a conundrum for sure.
Thank you for sharing that. And it is nice to have like a whole staff to be able to do that customer service, right? And I think Detroit's a bigger city than Ann Arbor, of course, but it's still really nice to be able to dedicate that time to have constituent relations like that. So I'm glad that you have that the extra expertise to be able to do that. So I think you are each one of the only, or maybe the only social worker on your elected body. Is that true? What is that? What does that feel like? Or do you notice anything about that you sometimes wish there were more social workers, or tell us about that.
Krystle, you unmuted yourself first, so you got to go first.
Wait, no. So this is interesting. It's interesting because the school board is clearly a nonpartisan position, right? So being a social worker helps in seeing multiple perspectives when you have to make hard decisions. The hardest decision you've made up until now was whether or not schools were going to open. If we're going to have schools for 5 days a week, and really thinking past, some of the debates and really think about the issue of it. How would this affect folks? How is this affecting people on different levels of having schools closed or having schools open? The aftermath, now that we're moving into this somewhat post-COVID space, the next decision we're making is whether or not we're going to go mask optional. I don't know yet, so I'm not giving y'all I can't give you anything on that. But in being one of the only social workers on the board, one thing that I have been able to do, and one thing that I'm hoping we'll do a little bit more, is being able to think of the human impact of how some of these things are. Kind of thinking past the data, even though I love data, but sometimes you have to really think past what they call it, the qualitative research, and think about the qualitative research over the quantitative research. How does this actually affect people? And these are, some of the things that you kind of think of. I remember when I was reaching out to different electeds in the area about mentorship, and they were saying like the school board is so very different. And it is, it really is, because like I said earlier, we are talking about the most important people in folks' lives, which is their children. You're thinking about the social and emotional health of the children in addition to their physical health. So these are decisions that, as a social worker, you kind of think of on multiple levels. When we just recently had a presentation that shared some of the mental health supports and social emotional supports that we're providing students now that everybody's back in school, and we're kind of seeing some changes with performance and changes with some of the students have more delayed social emotional skills because they haven't had that time in school to be around each other. Really keeping that conversation going not letting it go. Like, hey, no, this is important. Our community is asking for it. It's important because these are the exact effects that happens to students when we have all experienced this collective crisis. Kind of highlighting one of the things that I found to be so interesting at the national conference is there was a school board member that stood up and said that we have not given ourselves, our students, our teachers, our staff, we haven't been giving ourselves permission or time to grieve what happened, how we were pre-pandemic. And, the presentation was actually on trauma-informed schools. One of the presenters said, yeah, return back to normal doesn't mean a return back to the old normal, it's a new normal. So being able to recognize that and see how that all connects to the decisions that we make and the policy choices that we make, that's, one of the things that I noticed about being on the school board as a social worker. And it's, talking to other folks and kind of sharing my perspective, they kind of get it, after I talk. But, that's one of the things I noticed.
Wow, thank you. That's a really great connection between thinking about policy decisions, using the micro thinking of trauma-informed care, and also bringing in quantitative and qualitative data. I mean, that's social workers really have that like magic sauce to be able to do that. Lynn or Gabby, do you want to add anything about being like one of the only or the only social worker on your body?
Sure, I am the only social worker on my body. There's 9 of us, 7 district, 9, 2 at large. And an example that I can think of is just today. So actually right now, City Council they're voting on the budget, and I'm really sad that I can't be there to vote on my first budget. It's actually pretty heartbreaking because we worked so hard to move monies around to invest in housing, invest in transit, invest in seniors and language access. And while a lot of those things passed already, and today is really just the final vote, I won't be able to be there, which is really sad. But I did call in during public comments. And I think as social workers, we can remove ourselves from the politics and the politrics and the politicking, and be very frank and look at the collective data and the stories and the relationships that we have and that matter. And as an organizer that has worked together with grassroots organizations, one of those being Detroit Disability Power, they have been calling us nonstop, sending us hundreds of emails asking that we fund the Office of Disabilities at $1.4 million. That's not a lot of money. We have that money. We have an inflated police budget with 400 vacancies, adding up to about $9 to $12 million that it's just sitting there. And we see today that police have not, unfortunately, made us safer. And there are other ways that we can be investing our money to make us safer. So I've been pushing in the nicest, kindest way, saying, look, I know the majority of council here does not want to say defund the police, and that's fine. But I'm saying let's be smart and let's be strategic and let's be real about where the money is and where the resources are needed. And I actually got us to move some of the police money, but they were only willing to put the police money into our city council budget to raise some of our salaries. Today, though, during public comments, I called in along with all the activists asking for more money into the police, into the Office of Disabilities. And I mentioned again, colleagues, as we all know, we have a large police budget sitting there with 400 vacancies. Quite frankly, we're not able to fill those seats, and the city of Detroit loses our officers to the suburbs because we have a free training. We have like what's it called, a police institution or cadet training where we train you and you get paid, and then they leave with that training and that certification. So we're losing money. And quite frankly, I think the movement of defunding the police has really, made a mark, and people don't want to be police. People actually want to be more in their communities, and they're looking for other ways to rethink safety. So I think as social workers, we have a very unique position where we can state the truth, state the obvious, state the data, and not be fear mongering, which is quite frankly what I think happens on the other side when I heard things like, well, we don't want to defund the police. We can't defund, our safety. And I'm like, look, I'm not saying that, you are. I'm saying that we remove a minuscule percentage of this very large budget into things like the Office of Disabilities. So I think that's where we're different. I think that's where we can make a huge impact. And I know that's how I'm going to be doing my work.
Thank you. That's a really great example. And I'm so sorry you can't be there because of freaking COVID, not because you're here for our class. Because I would have told you to miss class, obviously, to be able to vote on your first budget. Lynn, do you want to add any comments about being one of the only social workers on council, or anything else that's related to what we were just talking about?
Yeah, I'm so glad police and public safety came up. A couple of things that I've been advocating for in the past year has been in anticipation of the federal relief money, ARPA money, and figuring out how to prioritize that. And there are a couple resolutions that I had co-sponsored. One was unarmed crisis response. And that was really something, Cahoots, and it is a program that we're modeling after. And the idea was that, if we can do what we can to avoid justice involvement with our community members and making sure that they get the help that they really need, whether it's mental health, substance abuse, housing, whatever it is that they need, their needs are met first. So that resolution was passed last year. We're coming on up on the first year, the anniversary behind that. And the mayor had written most of this, but I kind of inserted my own thinking and pushed back on a couple of things. I wanted it to really recognize that it was unarmed crisis response isn't just like a needs-based effort. It really comes out of a response to how police have been known to also cause harm in community. I recruited Paul Fleming, a public health professor. Well, I actually Twitter stalked him. So I don't know how many public officials Twitter stalk public health researchers, but this is not my expertise, right? So I reached out to him and I said, I see that you've consulted on programs like this around the country. Could you come in and, actually meet with myself, the mayor, and I brought in Lisa Jackson, who's the chair of the Police Oversight Committee that I also serve on. And honestly, I just wanted a majority of people of color in a virtual room to speak to lived experiences and the stories that you hear from community. I pressed on a fact that research that Paul had produced saying that death by police is the 6th leading cause of death for Black men, and trying to see if I could kind of just ease that into the resolution language somehow. I felt like it had to be a strong statement, like it was really important. We have a Black Lives Matter flag at City Hall. We're working on a Black Lives Matter mural in our parks and on our streets. And City Council had also voted previous to when I was on council, stating that racism is a public health crisis, right? But what does it actually mean in practice? It's one thing to make statements, but what is the programmatic answer to that? And I wanted it to actually speak to harm in community. Our police budget is $31 million out of a $470 million budget. We have 125,000 residents in Ann Arbor. That's a lot of money for a police force. And I wanted, if we weren't going to talk about reallocating the budget that I kind of inherited, that at least use the federal relief money towards, innovative ways to really serve communities most impacted by the pandemic. So that came through last Monday. That was approved last Monday, thankfully. I had engaged grassroots activists pretty early on after the resolution was passed last year. And a lot of that was in conversations where I said, I'm new to this, I'm learning also, but I worry that something like this can't be just left to the hands of city staff. I love city staff. We've got amazing folks who work every day for the city, but this is unusual. This is a true social work grassroots effort. And they really came through an organization called CROS formed, and it was clergy, social workers, abolitionists, mental health professionals came together and they worked really, really hard. So it was to their credit that that was passed. And the other, I guess, another social work effort was universal basic income. It was more a guaranteed income. There's another social worker on city council who actually wanted to take that money and reallocate it to street improvements at the very last minute. So whereas this program it is now that it's passed, we're the first and only city in Michigan to use this money. So it would be $500 a month, no strings attached, 100 low-income families in Ann Arbor for 2 years. The very last minute, the other social worker said, that I get a lot of complaints about road improvements. How about we take that money for road improvements? It would have improved 1 mile of road. And I had to fight really hard to say that we can put people before we can do both. Actually, we're bonding for road improvements, but if we're talking about pandemic relief, and this is something that keeps folks from the edge of, it'll help them stay in the city, in a very expensive city. Our average median income in Ann Arbor for a single person is $70K a year. For a family of 4 is $100K. Average house cost right now is over $400K. That's a lot. So if we couldn't figure out how to put 1.6 million for 100 families over 2 years, then it was shame on us.
Yeah,
but it was barely. It was a close call.
Yeah, I do. So I do think social work perspective helps, like you were saying, Krystle, show the impact of the decisions. You're able to talk to folks all around the table about the impacts of the decisions you make, in part because you've went and talked to people who are going to be impacted, and maybe they're not coming to you, but you go to them. Like that's something that social workers do. So we're going to wrap up in just a second. I have one final question for you, and I do want to let you all know the students for this class. This is only a 1 credit class. It's pass fail. I remind the students every week that it's 1 credit class and it's pass fail. And they made a final project, and it will be either a podcast or a webinar. And the projects were all related to policy issues in front of the Ann Arbor City Council in the end of last year or the beginning of this year. And this is the second time I've taught this class this semester, and unarmed crisis response was a topic in both sections of the class. Opioid settlement funding and response there, ARPA distribution and engagement, renters issues. These were some of the issues that the students made their projects on. So I'm sure that some students are like really geeking out right now hearing you talk about the unarmed police.
Will they run for office? That's
well, that was my next question, actually. So you're all elected, but that's not the only way to get involved. So social workers, part of our code of ethics is, you gotta do political action in some way. So for some people that might be running for office, for some people that might not be. So what advice do you have for social work students? If you want to give advice to run for office, do it. But what other kinds of stuff could students do or think about doing as they're going into their careers?
I would love to start on this one. This is a very exciting question. Quite frankly, because I'm only 4 months in, or like 3 months, 14 days in, and I'm thinking already, I can do without this. There are other ways to do good work. There are other ways to impact and make change and make a difference. I am sitting in a large and slow machine. And quite frankly, it is important to have good people that will actually respond and read the emails and care about the efforts that you're making. But I would just truly push everyone to organize with your community, to really build your base, to not be the one sole voice coming to the school board meeting or coming to the city council meeting. Come with your pack. And that is very possible to do on your block, in your neighborhood, in your schools. I think organizing is the most powerful way of creating change. And quite frankly, I I push the way that I do right now because of the organizers in my community. I'm an activist in my community. So yes, it is important to elect good people who will be held accountable to your job. Quite frankly, this work is also very hard and difficult. And some days are better than others. Some moments are better than others. I think I just have to go to therapy to get over the bad moments because in general, the work that we do, as we just heard from some council member song, is we can do really good work. But really, I think it takes people pushing those in office, but also just creating community, creating visible change, creating visible community power, I think will grow our hope. Because I think right now people feel pretty hopeless. People feel as if people in office don't care, so that's why we don't engage in local politics. But quite frankly, have a dinner, talk about the issues, and then get to work on holding people accountable on those issues, because I think that really goes a long way.
Thank you. That's great advice.
I want Krystle to go next because she was like rubbing her hands earlier. What was that about, Krystle?
Oh no, I'm just thinking of all the things, all the trouble you can make, aside from, running for office. So I will say, if you are specifically interested in legislative change, then kind of dual volunteering. At one point, I was volunteering with the Poor People's Campaign as well as the Washington County Democratic Party, right? So it gave you that dual perspective of what is being said and how people view things in activist circles, and then in political circles it's a little bit different. So being able to fill those spaces and kind of see both sides of the fence is super, super important. Being able to volunteer to, if you like to organize, volunteer to organize, an event for your local, party affiliation, even though I keep saying the County Democratic Party, what's your party affiliation? I will say that, being nonpartisan as I can be right now. But, go out and look for different organizations who can spend time organizing with. Black Lives Matter, they have chapters literally everywhere. So reach out and see if you can do some organization there. Again, the Poor People's Campaign is a good place to go. There are places where you can volunteer to help folks. There are a couple people that I know, I think Linh is one of them, that were helping Afghan refugees, as they were coming here. So, there are so many things that you can do that is impactful in your community. I spent some time at Park Ridge Community Center, and, I appreciate the time that I spent there. I actually got a chance to learn a lot and, to spend a lot of time seeing what the community is like. So all these things, you can kind of just figure out where your spot is, where your niche is, and just kind of fall into it, full on. So yeah, that's my advice.
That's great advice. Thank you. Linh, what's your advice?
I would say don't wait to be invited. And don't assume that there's like some great recruitment scheme for local politics. People invite themselves to the table. I've been recruiting local candidates to run for local office. I'm very lonely. No, meaning that it's not as diverse as we can be, given the makeup of Ann Arbor and our reputation as a progressive city, right? So, in those discussions, people are always surprised. They assume that like the party does recruits folks. But, I always think of this one story of our mayor where he said his first foray into local politics was for running for city council. And someone said, you should really do this. And he said, all right, I'm in. And he didn't even know who he was going to run against. So if we can have the confidence and the wherewithal of a tall, very likable white man attorney, then I think we would see different folks at the table. Don't wait to be invited, find room or find issues. I think a lot of folks here are really creative in how you approach community. Last summer, Krystle and I, we organized a Black Asian Solidarity Cookout, which was kind of interesting for local electeds who asked to come. And I said, well, you're not Black or Asian, we'll send pictures or we'll make a plate for you. You know, we had to create our own space because there were things happening in community. There was a shooting in Itzy Township. A Vietnamese man had shot a young Black child, and there was a lot of just a lot of fear, like what would happen afterwards. So, you know, local electeds came together and said, you know, we just actually need to be in the same place together with our children, with good food. And it was a loving response, you know, and so I think like when we talk about organizing, it's talking about how we love each other, and like make commitments to each other, right? So besides, you know, having that particular event, you know, folks want to do it again this year, but, you know, in recruiting candidates, I've been really, really mindful of recruiting BIPOC candidates, especially Black candidates, and trying to see, you know, what kind of resources need to be on hand, what kind of support need to be made available, because there isn't, I mean, Ann Arbor has had one Black mayor in 1975 for a year, and his election was disputed and contested. So that was why he only served 1 year. In 1975, we had one Black city administrator, I think in the late 70s, early 80s. And now we have our second, Milton Dehoney, who just came in after our previous, or immediately prior city administrator had been investigated and resigned after you know, racist and homophobic things were published that he admitted to. So, you know, I talked about like racist interactions on the campaign. A lot of the politics is rooted in some kind of element of our inability to speak about racism and the impacts of racism, be it from like zoning. We talk about, you know, why are certain communities are being pushed out. We had a historically Black community that's no longer here. We're only 77% Black now. So I don't know. It's a long-winded answer to just say, you know, don't wait. See if you see a gap, try to meet it yourself, find allies and work together. Krystle, like Krystle and I, we've been talking for 2 years now. It's been a while. And you know, we try to uplift each other. And I think that's really the root of, you know, maybe why we're involved politically and in community is we need more of this.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that great advice from all three of you. I mean, Shirley Chisholm told us that if they don't invite you to the table, you bring a folding chair. So we need to just be bringing our folding chairs with us and plop down, don't wait. So thank you for that advice. Thank you so much for being on this panel. I think the students who are here tonight and the students who will watch on the recording are going to really learn a lot. And I think I'm personally really appreciative. You know, my students have been hearing from a white woman the whole semester, and I really think it's important for them to hear from other folks, especially BIPOC folks. So thank you for being on this panel tonight. And I will stop the recording.